Good morning and welcome to the Point. This is a show that you may want to mark, and remember that you can always find it at woodtv.com, because what we're going to be talking about this morning is what I think is probably one of the, and I say this every 2 years, one of the most important election cycles that we've been through. It at least will be an unusual election cycle because there are so many changes. And so instead of me trying to talk about it, I brought in a couple of experts. And so welcome, if you will, Lisa Postumus-Lyons, who is the county clerk for Kent County, and Justin Roebuck for the county clerk of Ottawa County. Thank you both for being here, because this is going to be a really important election. 148 members of the House and Senate in Michigan, all up for a vote in districts that they've never run in before. We'll start talking about that in a few minutes. Obviously a race for governor and for 13 members of Congress, one fewer than we had with the last census. But I'm going to start with you in Kent County, because in addition to all of that, we had a special election. I'll go through the short form of it. Sitting senator becomes a county official. Sitting House member becomes a senator in a special election to replace him. And now we're in the process of a special election that we've already gone through the primary. And on May 2nd, 3rd, May 3rd, there will be that special election. Talk a little bit about that and the added complexity for your office.
Sure. So every year for a clerk is election year.
Right.
The public always looks at the even years and thinks, okay, we've got big elections coming up this year, but in the election administration world, every year, every election is a big one. So this year is no different. We have 4 elections, the regular primary and general in August and November. And then, as you touched on, we've had a special primary election for the 74th House District, and on May 3rd, we'll conduct the special general election for the 74th. We have a Republican nominee, Robert Regan. We have a Democratic nominee, Carol Glanville. And not to even further complicate a 2022 cycle with redistricting and special elections, we actually have a qualified write-in who is filed for that seat as well, in Mike Milanowski. So that election is May 3rd, and the 74th is basically it's northwest Kent County all the way down to Walker and Grandville, at least as it currently is.
Right, and that's a very good point, because whoever wins that race will be in office about 6 months.
Correct.
In this term, because the new districts that you will run for in the August primary are considerably different. In fact, the bulk of that district, I think, will become the 84th, which will be a much smaller geographic looking area.
Correct. So the 74th, that is part of the special election, really come August, part of that district will be broken down. Some will be in the new 84th, some in the 90th, some in the 91st, and some in the 89th. So this 74th special election is just through the year to give representation in that vacancy that we have right now. And whoever wants to run to fill that new seat for the next term, they have to file in addition to this special election. They're completely separate.
And they have to figure out where they live. For example, in that primary on the Republican side, one of the people who ran and was not successful wouldn't have run again anyway, because they'll be in the 89th district, which is largely an Ottawa County district, except a small portion that comes over into Kent County. But we're not quite to redistricting yet. Talk to me about what you do to start preparing. And I know that, as you point out, it's a perpetual cycle for you guys, and it's a little disingenuous to say every 2 years, because obviously you've got elections all the time. But at this point in this year, as we're coming up on the filing deadline, April 19th, in that neighborhood?
For partisan candidates.
So that's for the partisan candidates. What are you doing in your office to prepare?
Well, there's a lot of things that go into it, as you mentioned, Rick. I mean, one of the main components of our responsibility early in this cycle and in a 2-year cycle is the certification and training of election workers. So state law gives counties the responsibility for training of election workers in any jurisdiction that's 10,000 and below in population. And so what that looks like is we're training a little over 1,000 election workers in Ottawa County over the next couple of months as we gear up for that primary and general election cycle. But we're also doing a lot of other things. So the programming end of things is also a county responsibility. When you look at the the ballots, the candidates that go on the ballot. We're obviously accepting filings in our office, but we're also putting candidate names on ballots, proofing those, ensuring the accuracy of the ballot prior to printing, and then the printing and distribution of the ballots is a county responsibility as well. And so we're taking a lot of those steps. Obviously, we're gearing up for the May election, the May 3rd election. Ottawa County has almost a county-wide election as well, various school proposals throughout the county. We're a little bit unique in Ottawa because we own the election equipment. The county owns the equipment in Ottawa County. Most of the state of Michigan municipalities own the equipment. And so another responsibility that we have is the logic and accuracy testing at the county level. But locals as well do this. So logic and accuracy testing is a very important element in the pre-election process. It's a public meeting. And essentially the members of the public can come in and view this process, but we're running a series of test ballots through the equipment. Every single device that is used in the election has to be tested through a series of predetermined tests. And then those ballots are sealed up and the equipment is locked away until Election Day.
And what Justin is talking about, that's standard operating procedure for every single election. We're in the middle of conducting our tests for the special election for May. But on top of that, as it relates to redistricting, our local clerks, we're very fortunate to have some of the best clerks in our jurisdictions throughout in the state. But they're actually getting ready for the impacts of redistricting, because as we program, our programming is only as good as our file, our QVF. And so what our local clerks are doing is taking these new maps and going through street by street by street by street to make sure that, that our file that we use to program the ballots is accurate and of accurate reflection of the new districts. So we've got all the regular procedures that we put in place, and we put ours on our website. We want people to come, especially when it comes to testing our equipment. We want them to watch what we do to make sure that our election equipment is operating functionally and accurately. But on the flip side, we've also have this added responsibility to make sure that we are prepared for the new districts when it comes to programming our ballots in our elections.
You both bring up a couple of really interesting points, and one of them is, and let's just go ahead and say it, election integrity, because that's what we're talking about when we're talking about these voting machines that you are responsible in some level for all the way across these elections. And it's not just the elections I'm talking about. When we get to the House and Senate, we're going to talk about those in the second half of the show. But it's all of these other millages and all of these things that people will be voting on that have a really direct impact on them. So I want to ask you two questions. I'm going to start with you. You said you are training 1,000 election workers. Most are volunteer?
Actually, they're not completely volunteer, so they're paid positions, actually. Oh. And they're the responsibility of the local clerk is to hire and pay election workers. And so, you know, it's certainly what I would consider a volunteer opportunity, right? Because a lot of folks are giving up a day at work or coming in, and, you know, maybe your employer is one of those employers that allows that as a free day and a vacation day to facilitate helping the process as well. But election workers are actually paid.
But to be clear, they're just doing this for the day. They're not, you know, they're not on your payroll
Exactly.
on a permanent basis. So for both of you, given what elections have become over the past couple of years, knowing the kind of real turmoil that has been surrounding elections, do you have any difficulty in finding people who want to take that one day and that want to take the time to get trained and who may want to take the time to have somebody, you know, be unkind at the poll? Is that anything either of you are seeing?
Well, for us in Kent County, to meet some of those challenges and the focus and the emphasis on election integrity and security, I think the transparency is absolutely key. And so, you know, Justin touched on these public meetings and, you know, with the equipment testing, but we've got the canvas and the audits and all that. We roll out the red carpet. We want people to come and learn how their elections are conducted. But when it comes to the election workers, in Kent County, even throughout the height of the pandemic, we were very fortunate to not have any issues with a worker shortage in that area. In fact, since the 2020 election, interest in working our elections has only grown, and we have been, in our county, we've been training election inspectors who may not end up working in Kent County, but they will be trained, they'll be certified, and they'll be able to be dispatched to areas where there will be a need for workers.
And I think it's so interesting because I've said a number of times throughout the pandemic in 2020, leading up to that major presidential election cycle, we certainly got a lot of calls in our office, right? A lot of questions, a lot of voter questions, a lot of concerns about the process, a lot of conversations that we had. But I would say one of the number one calls that we got was, how can I help? And that really, it blew me away. And I think it's just an amazing example of the kind of community that we have. Our election workers are incredible, and we couldn't do it without them. I mean, they are the backbone of the process. They're also on the front lines. I mean, we can't open precincts without election workers there. And these are people in their neighborhoods. Most of them are helping their neighbors engage in the democratic process. And we have, like Lisa was saying, seen an increase in the number of people who are willing to engage. I also think it's a great opportunity to just get educated. I mean, this training is a couple hours, 2.5, 3 hours at most, and you're engaging hands-on with equipment, and you're having conversations with folks who have worked for a number of years or with your trainers. It's a great way to learn the process and also to serve in your community.
There is so much more to talk about, and we're to do that when we come back in just a minute. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. Today we're talking about the elections that are upcoming with a couple of county clerks, Lisa Posimus-Lyons from Kent County and Justin Roebuck from Ottawa County. Let me start with you, Justin. We were saying during the break, these aren't necessarily new things, but there are some newer elements to voting that were enacted after 2018, after we took some very significant votes to change the way we can cast our votes here. And they've had a big impact. I think both of you would agree in the amount of absentee voters that are participating, but it's different than it used to be. And there probably are still questions in the mind of some people because now it's no reason to absentee, and you can start pretty early.
Correct, yeah. So as you mentioned, in 2018, Proposal 18.3 changed the way we do absentee voting. You don't have to have a reason anymore. So you don't have to be absent from your community or over the age of 60. Anyone can vote absentee, and we did see a big shift in that, particularly with 2020, right? We had a global pandemic. People were kind of uncertain as to what the process was going to look like in the precincts. A lot of folks opted to vote absentee, and certainly we saw an increase. In fact, our primary election in Ottawa County, so the August 2020 primary, we had 68% absentee. And then the general election went down just a little bit, but it was still over 50% absentee. And of course, we saw that throughout the state, pretty much mirroring that. And so the option to vote absentee is still there. It's convenient for a lot of voters. A lot of folks like sitting down at their kitchen table, researching candidates, being able to fill out their ballot at their own pace, and securely mailing that back in or dropping it off in their local clerk's office as well. So
one of those changes is you can do it 45 days in advance. And I don't know how many people change their mind about a candidate within that period of time. But if you vote in advance, there is a mechanism that you can change your vote. So it's not like, oh, if I vote early, then my vote doesn't count if I change my mind, right?
Correct. That's the difference between Michigan, which is an absentee voting state, and other states that have early voting. Michigan is not an early voting state. In an early voting state, you go before the election, you fill out your ballot, you cast it right there, and it's tabulated, and you walk away and you're done. Absentee ballots are not tabulated until election day. And so there's a mechanism anytime leading up to I believe the Monday before the election, an individual has the right to come in if they change their mind or what have you. There's an October surprise. They have the ability to come in and spoil that ballot and be reissued a new one and cast that ballot. So I think there's a very important differentiation between absentee voting and early voting. we have begun mailing out absentee ballots. 45 days before the election is the federal requirement for military and overseas ballots. 40 days before the election is the requirement for any other absentee ballot applications that have come in. So, and then obviously any time throughout that time, an individual who wants to vote absentee just sends their application to the clerk's office and they'll be issued a ballot.
So that was one of the big changes that came out of that 2018 vote. And as you said, we used it in 2020, we'll use it again now. And it will be a big election year, as I talked about before. All the members of the House and the Senate and the U.S. House, Governor, Secretary of State. But the difference for those other offices that I mentioned is that they're all running in new districting. Let's talk about redistricting, which was also changed in 2018 for as long as I can remember. The legislature, and that meant, generally speaking, whoever was in control of the legislature redrew the lines every 10 years. So the reapportionment happens every 10 years, and it has for eons. And every 10 years, somebody's not happy. Well, so we decided that we're going to do something different. We're going to get this group of folks together. We're going to call them an Independent Redistricting Commission, and they're going to draw the lines. And they did. And some people are not happy. So it's the same outcome as every 10 years, except these districts look a lot different. We were talking just moments ago about the differences in the county, and we'll get to that. But you said something, you both were talking about this during the break, that there are going to be people confused even before they get to the ballot because they're going to get a new card in the mail. Talk to me about that and why that's going to be surprising for some, because it's going to change for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, correct. So, as you mentioned, this is a process that happens every 10 years at some level. And so, by law, when a district changes for a voter, when any sort of information on a voter's identification changes, which could be your district, your polling location, a school district, a congressional district, whatever that is, they're required, the local clerk is required to mail a voter ID card. And so we have literally millions of Michigan residents who very shortly will be getting new voter ID cards. So for example, all of the state level districts in Ottawa County changed the number. So we may have some folks with the same representative currently, but that district number changed. And so, all of our local clerks are in the process right now of mailing voter ID cards. So it's important to note when you get this in the mail, this is a confirmation of your new districts, your new district numbers. It's going to have your polling location on there. Nothing that the voter needs to do at this point. You can always check out michigan.gov/vote. That's obviously going to be updated very shortly with all of your information. And as it gets closer, you'll have a sample ballot there as well. But another thing to note as well is that for folks who are receiving, these voter ID cards, voter ID cards can be mailed to folks who are on what we call the Cancellation Countdown. And that is, by federal law, a list of folks who we have verifiable information that they may have moved, for example. So if you've moved out of the jurisdiction, and we have some sort of information, but not a direct confirmation yet from the voter, they will also be getting this mail. So for example, if you've just moved recently into a new home, you may get a voter ID card for the individual who previously lived there if their process has not been updated. So we just don't want people to be alarmed about that. That is a process and a check and balance that's in place, and it's part of what we call a cancellation countdown. We can't just cancel a voter immediately unless we receive confirmation from a voter.
And along with all of that, folks are going to be surprised to know that the district where they lived is going to be geographically, in some cases, much, much different. And that brings me to one of my concerns as a political reporter who on election night is worried about results. It's been pretty easy. I could go to Ottawa County. I could track those districts that were fully contained inside a county, get county results, and I can put them up on the big board over there. Kent County, I can do the same thing and all over. As I look at these districts now, in Kent County, we talked about this earlier, and I think we determined there's only going to be one of 5 state Senate districts that is wholly contained within the county, meaning that those results are going to have to come in from, in some cases, multiple county. In one district, it will be Ionia, Montcalm, Kent, a small part of Muskegon and Lake County. That will all be one district, and each of those counties will have to get the tallies in. How confusing is that going to be?
Well, truly, that's my bigger concern when it comes to the voters and what they experience as a result of redistricting, particularly here. It may not be as much an issue in the rural north where they have always maybe had multiple counties in one district, but practically speaking, when a voter, despite receiving your voter ID cards, redistricting, other than maybe the incumbent or the candidates and the district number may change, but practically speaking, particularly for Kent County, very little changes in terms of their polling locations. Almost by and large will remain the same. They'll go and they'll do everything that they normally did. It's on election night that I think is the bigger concern. You touched on it. These are vastly different than what we experienced in previous redistricting efforts. And I can take myself as a personal example. My last term in the Michigan House of Representatives, when I ran, I was one of maybe only two legislative seats, particularly in the House, that crossed county lines. I had partial Kent County, partial Ionia County. Well, on election night in November, I narrowly lost Ionia County portion, and the headline in the Ionia newspaper, incumbent gets defeated by challenger. But I won with over 60% of the vote, or 60% of the vote, because the portion of Kent County margin was so significant. And so if voters aren't careful, if the media is not careful, if candidates aren't careful, they may have the impression, the mistaken impression of election results that just aren't accurate. And we all know results aren't official anyway until the canvassers certify them. But we just are going to have to remind voters and the public that when you come to our websites, those are the county results. And so you'll have to piece together all of those results on election night until they're done through the canvass. And I would be remiss too if I didn't mention that not only are these legislative and congressional districts changed, we have major changes in the counties. Justin and I both sat on our county's apportionment commissions where we redrew the county lines too, and we've got significant changes at the county level.
We've got about a minute left, minute and a half. Talk for just a moment to people out there who have been concerned about the elections. We know, we've heard, we're not going to relitigate that here. But tell me with your best assurance that what we're about to enter into is a safe, legitimate, reliable process. About 30 seconds.
Well, I think it's critical. Our process is critical, and it's critical that we're all involved and all engaged. We welcome those questions, but for us, I think the most important thing we can do is be completely transparent and completely open about the process, the security of our process, the things that we can do better. We're always open to those suggestions, and I think I would say our process has a number of checks and balances throughout. And we are confident going into this election cycle that we have a sound and secure election, and it's held by members of our community.
About 30 seconds.
Michigan's elections are unique in that we're very decentralized. We have numerous checks and balances, and I believe that we have a system that is set up, our laws are set up, that if you follow the law and do things right, you can trust that your election. So, but don't take my word for it. Trust me, but verify. Come to all of these public testing, the canvass, the audits. Come to it. Trust but verify, and you'll know that our elections in Kent County are secure, transparent, fair, and accurate.
And part of that transparency was both of you being here today. I appreciate that very much. We'll be right back with Final Thought next, To the Point. That's all the time we have for this show. We'll see you next week. To the Point.